Hello there. You're the one that want to hear the story of the Chameleon, huh? Well, sure, I'll oblige. You can sit there and just listen. In the devastating aftermath of the worldwide natural disaster that most fans attributed to the battle on top of Mount Shire, many children were left as orphans. Though Ahna was one long before that, she never met her real parents, and she lived in an orphanage in a small town to the southernmost part of Obsidian. This town, known as Red Deck, was far from the most luxurious of places to live, basically the slums of Obsidian. Red Deck had a few businesses, and almost everyone living there was struggling to get by. Young Ahna wanted to help the people of Red Deck, but she didn't know how, until one day, Ahna's life changed forever. A traveler came through town, one that was well versed in magic. He showed off his talents to the orphans. Magicians often come through Red Deck, hired by the owners of the orphanage to try to give children some entertainment. Ahna had seen quite a few in her day, but this traveler was different. His act is that you would expect from any magician, till he got closer to the finale of his bit. He presented the children with an empty bucket, showed it to them to confirm its emptiness. Then, with a snap of his fingers, the bucket filled with water. In a town struggling to get by, people took notice of a man making water out of thin air. Shrugging it off as a cheap trick, the people started leaving him alone. But later that night, while getting ready for bed and helping the other younger orphans get settled in, one of the orphans noticed that a strand of Ahna's hair had changed color. It had blue highlights. After confirming in a mirror, one of the caretakers came by to check on what the ruckus was all about. Upon noticing the blue highlights in Ahna's hair, their face twisted into more of a look of concern and ushered Ahna out of the room. That night, without explanation, Ahna slept in a room all alone. It had been the first time she was separated from the other orphans since she got there. At only 16 years old, Ahna didn't know what to expect. When morning came, one of the adults that helped her out in the orphanage came to get her. Phoebe was her name, and she was the most loved and respected of the caretakers. Phoebe escorted Ahna outside and told her that the lineage which she came from was very special. Taken aback by her words, Ahna immediately tried to dig deeper. Unfortunately, there was only so much Phoebe knew, but she knew that Ahna had special abilities. She asked Ahna what she thought of the magic show before. Ahna, thinking some parts were real and some were fake, and pointed out that creating water in the bucket was most probably the one that was real. It felt different somehow, she said. Phoebe went and fetched an empty bucket and placed it on the floor in front of Ahna. The two stood in silence for a moment. Ahna looked up at Phoebe and back down at her hands. Finally, she looked past her own hands and at the empty bucket. She looked close her eyes. Phoebe moved behind her and got Ahna's hair out of her shoulders and out of the way, pulling the strands back and getting her out in tangles with her fingers. Ahna started thinking about the time by the border of the Warble. The waterfall there. Real nice and pretty. Thinking of the flow of the water particles in the air, and all that mist. Last but not least, pray to the fish goddess Morska. Thinking about all these things, she eventually managed to fill up the bucket. Excited by this, she exclaimed she could finally help Red Deck. She could sate all their thirsts, and, hopefully, in the future, sate all their hunger. In her excitement, she embraced Phoebe. No one would go thirsty again in Red Deck. The water magic stayed with her for a long time. However, on her 18th birthday, her life took another sudden turn. King Ingvar and Lord Kazai were on the brink of war, but both rulers had to secure their own land first, before fighting each other. King Ingvar's Obsidian Knights were terrorizing the entire countryside, and Red Dick was no exception. Fathers and mothers were protecting their children, and the caretakers desperately tried to save as many orphans as they could. Ahna, being the oldest, helped the caretakers get the orphans to safety, and helped hide them in a cellar underneath the orphanage. Once that was done, Phoebe grabbed Ahna by the hand and led her to another secure location, a hiding spot, inside one of the wooden walls of the orphanage. She told her to stay there and never leave. Ahna only nodded in response, fearing the wrath of the Obsidian Knights. Before Phoebe left, she left her with one more message: that she could never, ever trust anyone else with her magic. Ahna could feel Phoebe's hands shaking too as she held them in her own. But just as Ahna was about to turn around and go to her hiding spot, a sword swung down and slashed Phoebe from behind. An Obsidian Knight stood behind Phoebe. As she collapsed on the ground, Ahna tried to run, but the Obsidian Knight grabbed her by the hair and turned around towards the entrance of the room. "Look at what we got here," began the knight as Ahna turned around and saw a tall man with scars all over his face standing in the doorway. Ahna was even more terrified of the sight of the man, but suddenly realized the man was holding her by the hair. Didn't know the man either. "Wait, who are ye?" he called out, like an idiot. Ahna could see a few dead Obsidian Knights behind the man in question. She could also see he was holding a katana drenched in their blood. Obsidian Knight let go of her, and she dropped to the floor. She closed her eyes and looked away, but the fight, if you could even call it that, was over in mere seconds. The man holding her by the hair a moment ago hit the floor with a hard thud. Scared, Ahna surrendered immediately, put her hands up. The man asked who she was and if she was Ahna. She exclaimed yes. Ahna looked up at him. Despite his scary appearance, she suddenly felt very calm around him. As she stood up, the man put his bloodied katana back in his sheath. He introduced himself as Jack, and that he'd been hired to protect her. Well, that's the story. That's all I know. Now, I'm not going to be telling it again. Well, unless you're willing to cough up a few more coins. If not, leave me to my drink.